Well, thank you, Richard, and good morning, everyone. Can we even remember a time when concerns about cyber attacks were only about nuisance viruses, the odd outage, and maybe the defacing of a website by some merry prankster? Seems like a generation ago, doesn't it? A millennial generation ago, I hasten to add. By the way, just so I have a feel for the audience, raise your hand if you're a baby boomer like me. Okay, there's still a number of you among us. A Gen Xer? A lot of you. And how many of those pesky millennials? Yeah. All right, I think I have enough trophies for all of you millennials. Now, the boomers in the audience, they're probably getting another 200 basis points on their retirement accounts just as we sit here. But the Gen Xers, which seems to be the largest group, you guys are screwed. Because you're sandwiched between all of us baby boomers, AKA your bosses, who won't get off the stage. Notice I'm on the stage. And the millennials, who need constant praise and reassurance, hence the trophies, and never do anything without asking why. Anyway, I'll trash the boomers later, rest assured. So, where was I? Oh yeah, that cyber attack thing. George Santayana, the philosopher, is famous for saying, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." That's why I'm starting this keynote with a little history and some recollections from the not-too-recent and recent past. Almost from the beginning of computing, there were self-perpetuating programs, the precursor to malevolent viruses. So there was never a time when we weren't dealing with some form of virus. But it wasn't until the time millennials reached their teen years in 1995 that the term phishing was first coined, relating to an attack on AOL. AO hell indeed. And it wasn't until 2003, as I remember it, that phishing went mainstream and criminals discovered the internet in a big way, coinciding, not coincidentally, with the founding of Mimecast. And I do remember the year well. We had come out of the dot-com crash, and online services and applications were ramping up. There was some irony to that, given all of the hype that led to the crash in the first place. Nicholas Negroponte, who was the former head of MIT's Media Labs, he's shown here in his role founding One Laptop per Child, he said that the internet, in 1996, he said this, was the most overhyped yet underestimated phenomenon in history. As humans and technologists are wont to do, our imaginations got ahead of our ability to deliver. So he was actually quite prescient. But a combination of advances in compute power, storage, bandwidth, and the emergence of virtualization technology, mobile, and ultimately cloud capability set in motion the overwhelming attack surface that all of you are defending today. And not unlike the universe, with the coming of IoT and IoE, the attack surface is ever expanding. Hey, what's going on? Seems like the attack surface has extended to this building. Seriously, I hope it's not something malicious. It's probably just technical. Okay, let's see how resilient these people can be. Can we get the lights back on, please? It's probably a case of human error. Oh my God, I can't believe I fell for this cheesy way to call attention to cyber resilience. Clever but lame Mimecast. Okay, in the rehearsal, I got a much bigger laugh from the audience. Way bigger. Way bigger. Okay, anyway, if your burden wasn't heavy enough, you have other issues: privacy, regulation, a dizzying array of vendors, the skills shortage, and board attention and scrutiny. More to come on that later. So where does all of that leave you? It's still the hackers. The evolution of the attack surface and the explosion in the number of digital assets has opened the door wider than ever for nation states, criminals, and non-state actors, the hacktivists and terrorists. Numbering only in the tens of thousands at the turn of the century, there are purported to be 200,000 in the People's Liberation Army of China alone. China, of course, is notorious for its criminal and espionage capabilities and is responsible for the overwhelming amount of IP theft that occurs globally in every single industry. North Korea was named as responsible for the Sony attack and WannaCry ransomware epidemic. Iran was behind the distributed denial of service attack on the US banks back in 2012, the attack on Saudi Aramco. And indications are they're back better than ever, at least covert cyber warfare with Iran. And by covert, I mean not getting much exposure in the press, but rest assured, they are very active. And what can I say about Russia? That the Mueller report hasn't already disclosed, and of course, Trump has denied. You know, our president, the stable genius with unmatched wisdom. Speaking of unmatched wisdom, do you guys recall that Giuliani was his first cybersecurity czar? Now, there was a wise choice. You can't make this stuff up. Anyway, there's something to add to Mueller. It's difficult to know where the Russian government action ends and their criminal enterprise begins. And speaking of criminals, as you know, they form their own ecosystem of attack designers, information gatherers, botnet service providers, perpetrators, and money launderers. Further, there's even evidence that less sophisticated nation states traffic with criminals to obtain capability that they themselves haven't been able to develop. And hacktivists have their own brand of motivation of attacks based on their view of righteousness. Is the world not upside down with WikiLeaks and Julian Assange when the Chinese and the Russians are somehow the good guys? It's crazy. And finally, terrorists are in the game, at least through the use of encryption technology to thwart their discovery. Are they going to be far behind actually launching their own cyber attacks? Now, when I got to this point in my keynote draft, I said to myself, what a confusing mess. And then that Temptation song from the 60s, Ball of Confusion, popped into my head. The lyrics, for you non-baby boomers, were about a time when the US was in a never-ending war, a time of divisiveness, social unrest, and racial tension, against a backdrop of mistrust and protest against a deeply unpopular president. Thank God we're not living in times like those. Come on, that got a bigger laugh in the rehearsal, too. Anyway, Winston Churchill once said, "Evils can be created much quicker than they can be cured." Technology, our dawning digital world, for all of its virtues, exacerbates that problem. Quite frankly, all of the technology that has washed over us in the last 20 years seems to have outstripped our ability to protect it and keep it from being exploited for nefarious purposes. So here's the situation. There's not a single industry or organization that hasn't been profoundly improved, changed, but disrupted by information technology over this time frame. And despite billions in spending on security technology and services, we are arguably less secure today in our infrastructures than we were even 10 or 15 years ago. Even Fortune 500 companies would be hard-pressed to defeat a determined nation-state attack. Why? Well, we've covered that ground, right? It's the attack surface expansion and the ever-increasing sophistication of the hackers. Add to that the nature of attacks has escalated from intrusive to disruptive to truly destructive, one can really understand that this is an existential threat to humanity. More than 10 years ago, my colleagues and I called on the industry to move from a reactive model of security to an intelligence-driven one. An intelligence-driven model starts with a focus on risk, depends on highly skilled people, requires the implementation of rigorous security processes, and relies on technology that is smart, agile, and integrated to create true defense in depth. Makes sense, right? Seems like a disconnect because I haven't seen wholesale and universal adoption. Why? Well, first, the model wasn't granular enough. It was at a very, very high level. But even with a better model and a more prescriptive one, not enough organizations have had the right leadership, board and C-level support, budget, and skilled resources to implement it. Let me give you an example. One of the top financial institutions has 250 people doing security technology strategy. They evaluate the latest innovative technologies, and they do proof of concepts. That's all those 250 people do. What a luxury. And overall, there are 1,600 people in their security organization. How many companies can afford that kind of investment? Further, the technologies required to implement a more complex model have only begun coming online. But what about the model? The Nist Framework outlines a chain of defense, as you see illustrated here. This isn't a bad high-level model, but it's too static and doesn't take into account the persistence of the attacker. The missing ingredient here is resilience. We have to be stronger and recover constantly along every step of the chain. Parry, thrust, parry, thrust. Thinking this way will prevent us from oscillating back and forth as we seem to between protection-heavy defenses and detection-heavy defenses, at the same time improving our overall resilience. I'm also talking about capabilities independent of that vertical chain that you see up there. We need a horizontal look that monitors the performance and efficacy of the controls in the chain. We also need to give visibility to users, applications, and data that operate independent of traditional infrastructure. These models never seem to take into account mobile, cloud, and third parties, the source of most of your troubles. And ultimately, to overcome the skills shortage, the capabilities in a more granular model will have to be delivered by service providers and/or operate autonomously enough with significant artificial intelligence that reduces the overall human resource requirements. Otherwise, we're never going to solve the skills shortage. Who in the industry is talking like this? Certainly not the industry analyst. Are you as tired as I am of their obsolete taxonomies of endpoint, network, IAM, vulnerability detection, blah, blah, blah? How many of the next generation security companies like Mimecast fit neatly into these categories or so-called magic quadrants or best-in-class reports? Think about it for a minute. Shouldn't we be talking about the problems we're trying to solve rather than the elements of infrastructure where certain controls reside? And shouldn't we do it holistically with reference architectures that illustrate how truly resilient defense in depth is achieved, as I just outlined? Show me that, and show me where a security vendor fits and what problem it solves, and then I'll show you how to make informed decisions. Now, I'm going to digress here for a few minutes because it won't matter how you implement any model if you don't have the support from the board and the executive leadership team. And I don't know how many of you have, I don't know how many times I have sat in board meetings when CISOs just come in and talk in jargon and talk about stats that don't seem to be relevant to board members, nor do they have any context that a board member would understand. So let me explain what you're up against when you go in and talk to boards. I'm 66 years old. According to KPMG, the average age of board members in the S&P 500 is 62.4. Clearly, I'm above average. See, that gets a laugh. In the same study, they noted that 98% of boards have an average age over 55. You know what that means? The vast majority of all directors are members of that know-it-all baby boom generation. Given this age profile, it's likely that boards know very little about technology. But because they're boomers, they think they do. Further, if this wasn't bad enough, further, in a study by Accenture, only 6% of financial services firms, one of the industries that most needs protection, report having anyone with technology experience, let alone cybersecurity. Think about that for a second. Can you imagine a board not having financial expertise? How in this age of digital transformation can we not have boards that don't have technology representation? So the view from the top is just shockingly ignorant. And it's not that they don't care. Cyber is on the top of any company's board's priority list of top 5 risks. The problem is not awareness. Everybody's aware of the problem. It's level of understanding and having a suitable governance model and oversight process. So how should you talk to them if you do get the chance? You should start by telling them something they will understand and they will agree with you on, at least at a high level, like all of the things that I've been covering. Again, if you explain this continuum of change over the last 20 years, they'll really get that. And they'll also understand the digital remaking of their businesses and how it affected the attack surface and the likely attackers with an overview of their attack methodologies. If you explain all of this at a high level, you'll get them listening and understanding. And you have to make sure your boards understand all of this in a way they will grasp any inherent cyber risk going forward. Next, I would tell them about other inferences that are being made about the future as a result of the adoption of machine learning and artificial intelligence. And I don't think I can stress this enough. You've heard other speakers talk about complexity. AI will take away some of that complexity, but it brings other challenges and unintended consequences. And AI is on every board's top priority list. So that's why I want to take some time now and explore AI in depth. So bear with me as I take you on a little AI journey. Here's the setup. Improvements in technology are allowing algorithms and machines to perform the work once performed by humans. We know that. This is why we're seeing such a massive number of jobs lost. The key question going forward is whether humans will maintain an advantage in any cognitive or physical activity. To help us answer this question, it's worth considering the paradoxes of technological improvement. It's truly amazing that advances in artificial intelligence have allowed machines to beat humans at cognitive games like chess or Jeopardy, or that cars can now be driven around complex environments without human assistance. At the same time, it's strange that other physical and cognitive skills have been less easy for machines to master, like natural language processing or dexterous physical movements, like running over rough terrain. See any iRobots climbing over furniture lately? It seems paradoxical that technology could be so good at some things and so bad at others. This paradox was famously identified by a gentleman by the name of Hans Moravec. Writing back in the 80s, Moravec noted the oddity in the fact that high-level reasoning took relatively few computational resources to replicate, whereas low-level sensory motor skills took far more. But there are other problems and issues. This brings us to the very closely related Polanyi paradox, named in honor of the philosopher and jack-of-all-trades genius, Michael Polanyi. Way back in 1966, Polanyi wrote a book called The Tacit Dimension, which examined the tacit dimension to human knowledge. It argued that to a large extent, human knowledge and capability relied on skills and rule sets that are often beneath our conscious appreciation, transmitted to us via culture, evolution, and so on. The thesis of the book was summarized in the slogan, "We can know more than we can tell." Let me repeat that. We can know more than we can tell. Hence, we could never have machines solve for Moravec, no matter how good our computational skill capability. In other words, machines with even an exponential increase in compute power could not learn what exists in our subconscious. If it were possible, sounds like the movie Terminator: Rise of the Machines could actually come to pass as reality. More likely, and far less fanciful as artificial intelligence gets more and more advanced, we can get machines to bypass the way humans behave and reason and still get a pretty good desired result. One way to control the environment and make it easier is to at least get a partial result. The second is to get the machine to mimic human judgment. They can't replicate it, but they can mimic it. And you can do this by using bottom-up machine learning techniques instead of top-down programming. The latter require the programmer to predefine the rule set that the computer will use when completing the task. That's just not likely to happen. The former gets the computer to infer its own rule set from a series of trials on a large data set. When all is said and done, prospects of machine takeover are more limited than some are claiming, and certain forms of machine complementary human labor are always going to be with us. Nevertheless, prepare to be astounded in the next 10 years with how much progress we make with machines and machine learning algorithms. And prepare yourselves and your boards for the inevitable risks. If security controls don't have their own AI and ML capabilities, and security is not built in, working side by side with machines, you can forget about resilience. Boards and managements, and you all, need to understand this. Hence the punchline. If and only if your board and management can see where all of this is headed and at the same time have the commensurate understanding of the impact of digital transformation on your business, for good or ill, can they possibly be receptive to any education about security that you can provide them? If they're not intellectually curious and trying to learn, they're just not fulfilling their fiduciary responsibility, and you don't have a chance. I hope at that point that it will not be the case. If they do get to a level of enlightenment, they are halfway to developing a cyber governance model and process. The other half is where you guys come in. And by that I mean educating them to the risks about what can be done about it. Now, you will achieve this by being thoughtful about the attendant risks that arise with each and every digital initiative and explaining that to the board in language mere mortals can understand. Next, you can take them through your own governance model and how you mitigate risk with a combination of your organization, your people, your process, your rule book, and technology, your security infrastructure. Rather than cite meaningless stats, give anecdotal examples of how everything works in practice, drilling down to the extent they can keep up with you. Doesn't that make more sense than the way you try and do it today? Notwithstanding this advice, it'll be an iterative process for you to get to a mutual level of comfort and communication. But I hope this gives you some food for thought. The last topic I'd like to cover is to share with you my investment criteria as a way to help you sort through which of the 3,000 vendors out there you should be doing business with. Based on my own research and my years in the industry, as well as feedback from CISOs, I've been using 3 filters as a start to determine my appetite for investment and whether I'll recommend an individual product to you guys. The security vendor must be doing one or more of the following. First, because there are already far too many controls for you guys to handle, the new product must replace an existing vendor product, but not with a linear improvement. Why switch? But with an order of magnitude better capability. And/or second, the new product must add significant leverage to an existing control environment, weaving capabilities together to improve resilience and strengthen defense in depth. And/or third, the new product must make the Security Operations Center more cost-effective, easing the personnel resource burden. Call me crazy, but shouldn't you guys be thinking this way as you determine which products to introduce to your solution suite? Do I have other filters beyond these 3? Of course, but before I get to them, I suggest that you evaluate the management team of the vendor first. Can the management team scale and manage growth as they become successful with their innovations? Is there continuity and are transitions in the company handled smoothly? A CISO once told me recently that it's hard to have vendor loyalty anymore. He said, Art, when you were in charge of RSA, I could just call you up and tell you there was a problem, and you would take care of it. And I said, yes, I know. And I took care of it by giving it to somebody else. But the fact is, he said there's no vendor loyalty if he has no relationship with the supplier. He also complained about the lack of innovation from the bigger vendors. And last, is the vendor well-funded, either as a public company or with reputable private investors? Okay, more things to consider. A complaint I hear from CISOs is that while they don't want to deploy too many point products, they're also hesitant to be wedded to a platform. That's no pleasing you guys, evidently, because you still want best-of-breed capabilities. I thought about this over and over again. Okay, you don't want point products. You don't want a monolithic platform. Well, I came up with a metaphor, and to apply it, think about it this way. You don't want to fill yourselves up in a dinner on fancy hors d'oeuvres that bear no relationship to one another. You get indigestion just thinking about it. And yet, you don't want a full-plated dinner consisting of $30 an ounce Kobe beef steak and then surrounding it with frozen peas, McDonald's French fries, and day-old bread. The metaphorical solution is a series of tapas plates with rich complementary flavors. Essentially, you want best-of-breed capabilities in a series of mini platforms. The more a vendor can expand from its core capabilities to complementary adjacencies, maintaining high standards of efficacy, the higher the probability of you being able to construct a cost-effective system that's easier to implement while reducing the possibility of gaps in coverage, while offering better cost effectiveness. By the way, no vendor will be successful with this approach unless it has a rich API capability. How else could you possibly knit all of these tapas plates together and create a coherent whole? What else? The ability to deliver product functionality from the cloud or through a series of managed service capabilities tailored for your specific situation dramatically would reduce your burden. Anything else? Yep. I've touched on this at a pretty great length. And that's the use of technologies that apply machine learning, other aspects of artificial intelligence that can give the CISO the ability as quickly as possible to see the signal in the noise. That's the only way to deliver real-time value. Because at some point in the attack, the adversary will do something anomalous. If the control system can process enough data and is smart enough and agile enough to spot the anomaly, the signal, the attacker can be blocked or isolated. I hope you see a strong parallel in my investment thesis versus your own point of view and positioning of new technologies and services. To conclude, I'd just like to tell you why I'm here. First and foremost, I love having the opportunity to mix it up with you guys as I was able to last night and over the course of this morning. Next, the folks at Mimecast are paying me life-changing kind of money. See, that gets a laugh too. Well, not quite, but just the same, I wouldn't have accepted the invite if I didn't believe in the company's vision and products. I also don't have a financial interest that I could be profiting from. So with that said, I'm really impressed when a company 16 years old and counting remains more than relevant to its customers. You do that with excellent leadership and a culture of innovation. And it does start at the top. I started meeting with Peter last June to make sure that this would be a good fit. We saw eye to eye on so much of where our industry needs to go to defend you, and we opened each other's eyes on a host of other topics. He was also smart enough to recruit some of my best people from RSA, and I'm proud of their continuing success. But it's the culture of innovation that I came away most impressed by. And it starts with how and where you live. If you haven't had a chance to visit Mimecast US headquarters, please try and get up there. It's worth it. The building exudes security. Hell, you have to go over a moat just to get to reception. The atmosphere, though, is incredible, from the building's environmentally efficient solar power to a culture with an emphasis on health and social consciousness. The briefing rooms are terrific, but once deep inside the castle, there's just an incredible energy and vibe that's difficult to put into words. It actually feels millennial, but in the best possible way. Every element of the space seems to have a distinct purpose that reinforces the mission. Only the people who have the most confidential information actually have offices. Peter himself doesn't have an office, but there's plenty of spaces set aside for privacy or when noisy discussions need to take place. Once there, it came as no surprise why turnover is low, productivity is high, and there's a constant stream of innovation, primarily organic, but inorganic as well. This is why Mimecast has been able to evolve from a point solution to what I called for earlier, a best-of-breed mini platform. This is why you're all here today. Mimecast is lucky to have you, and you're lucky to have them. Thank you very much.
There he goes.
Thanks.
Oh, take a bow. Here, take a bow. There you go. Come on, Art Coviello.